seat there is a comment card. If you fill that out, I already know what you're going to say about our presentation today, but let's just humor me here. Fill it out, let us know how much you like it, what you think could be improved, what you liked about it. This feedback is very important to us because it provides us an opportunity to get better speakers, better programs, better subjects to talk about in the future, or know that we're doing the right thing. So fill that out, and that's going to be very important to us. You can also indicate, by the way, whether you'd like to participate in our grassroots efforts here, whether you want to be a member of our email list, etc. So fill that thing out. We will collect them sort of halfway through the program, and we will do a drawing for 2 winners. The winners typically get a book, and I have 2 of them here with us today. This is The Corruption Chronicles, Obama's Big Secrecy, Big Corruption, and Big Government. And the author is, oh wait, it's Tom Fitton. It's almost like we arranged that for today. So this is the book for today. This is a hardcover copy. We also have a softcover copy. So we'll do 2 winners. So fill out your card, and you'll have an opportunity to win this very excellent book, which I'm sure you'll enjoy reading. So, all of that said, you guys are here today to listen to a very important speaker. Somebody that we've had more excitement about, I think, this event than we've had for any of our events in quite some time. We are joined today by Mr. Tom Fitton, of course. And the reason we have Mr. Fitton with us today, who's from Judicial Watch, is because, I don't have to tell you this, but 2016 is an incredibly important year. This is a year that is seeing elections from top to bottom at the state level, at the national level, and massive, large issues are being decided this year. So it's an incredibly important year. Now, 2 weeks ago, give or take, we had a rather large event happen in our presidential race. We had a director of the FBI, James Comey, come out and inform us that after a long investigation, many interviews, and much to do, Hillary Clinton broke the law. She did many things wrong. She abdicated her responsibility to care for the national security of this country, and basically gave up her sort of objectivity in favor of her own personal ambition. And we're not going to prosecute her. That's a major, major event, and I have to say, at the outset here, one of the reasons we even talked about this problem in the first place was because of Judicial Watch. Certainly there were a number of people that contributed to this becoming known in the first place, but some of the revelations about what's on her private server, that she had it, what she was doing, who she was talking to, were largely driven by Judicial Watch. And of course, Judicial Watch has been under the tender care of Mr. Fitton for going on 20 years now. It's 18, right? It was 1998, you said, Tom? Yeah. So you've been there since 1998. Judicial Watch is one of the finest organizations you'll find in Washington, D.C. They were founded in 1994, and I got it listed here. They were founded to promote transparency, honesty, accountability, and integrity in government, politics, and law. So you can see why they might have a special interest in Ms. Clinton. So, after 20 years of holding both sides accountable, you should definitely look into their history if you haven't already done so in preparation for this event. They have done an excellent job of not just holding liberals accountable, but holding government accountable. People in Washington, D.C. especially, but also at the state level. Once they become a member of the government, typically have a number of things that they do to obfuscate and obscure your view as a member of the public of what they do and how they do it. And we need groups like Judicial Watch, and hopefully the Maine Heritage Policy Center as well, to try to shine the light on what these people are doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and who they really are. That's been something that's been a hallmark of Judicial Watch for more than 20 years, and Tom Fitton has been at the helm of this organization since 1998. Let me tell you just a little bit more about him as we introduce him here. They have overseen tremendous growth in the past 20 years. Under Fitton's leadership, Judicial Watch was named one of Washington's top 10 most effective government watchdog organizations by the Hill newspaper. Mr. Fitton provides Judicial Watch with strategic guidance on leadership on Judicial Watch's comprehensive efforts to fight government corruption. He's a nationally recognized expert on government corruption, immigration, enforcement, congressional and judicial ethics, and open government. These are things that are very important to us at the Maine Heritage Policy Center. It's again one of the main reasons why we wanted to have him here. This has been something that we've cared about for a long time. He's a former talk radio and television host and analyst, and Tom is well known across the country as a national spokesperson for the conservative cause and he has been quoted in numerous publications, including nearly every newspaper in the country. He's also appeared on dozens of television stations. He's a former employee of the International Policy Forum, the Leadership Institute, and Accuracy in Media. Mr. Fitton holds a BA in English from the George Washington University and is, if you don't mind me saying so, one of the most indispensable people in the conservative movement, shining a light on what the government does. So please welcome me in joining Mr. Tom Fitton.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I've joked often that I still go to the Church of Our Lady of Perpetual Outrage, and nowadays the pews are much more full, because people understand now the crisis our country is in as a result of the corruption. And I'm pleased to be here in Maine. I sometimes have to check to see where I am. I can't tell you how important it is to have groups like the Maine Heritage Policy Center out there, these good government groups from the conservative perspective, to provide a conservative light at the local and state level. And I appreciate Matt and Heather's efforts in setting this event up. And your personal activism is essential. What would Maine have if, in terms of the conservative voice in public policy, if it didn't have the Maine Heritage Policy Center? What would it have? You'd have the poor governor doing it all by himself. We know that he's had issues from the media and from his enemies on the left. I can't tell you how essential it is to have partners like this at the state level for Judicial Watch and other national conservative groups, because we don't know where all the bodies are buried in Maine. Matt, I don't think you've buried any of those bodies, but you probably know where they are. So I'm pleased to be here. I knew I was in Maine when I got to the hotel room yesterday, and the heat was on in the hotel room. It is 80 degrees out, and someone still thought it was too cold, too hot, and they need the heat on. But it's wonderful to be here. I haven't been here 40 years. My dear old departed dad, I remember, took me and four of my brothers up here, and a cousin and a neighbor kid, and drove all the way up here to Maine. And I remember getting here, the toll taker said, "Oh, we still have another 60 miles to go." And he rented a cabin on the lake, and we get to the lake, and they said, "Well, you have to get in a boat." We got in a motorboat and went to the cabin, and were there for a week. So as a Catholic, I don't think my father's in purgatory because of that week. But I remember I have fond memories of that visit up here. So I was pleased to be back to discuss the current crisis. Now, for those of you, many of you are Judicial Watch supporters or have known about Judicial Watch. If you're a Judicial Watch supporter or know generally about us, could you kind of give me a signal in some way so I get a feel for the crowd? Okay, well, a good number of you, and appreciate your support because we can't do it without you. Know what Judicial Watch is. We're an anti-corruption watchdog organization. And on the conservative side of things, there isn't anyone in Washington who does the work we do, and frankly, worldwide, there's nothing to compare with what Judicial Watch does. And we use the law, I'm not a lawyer myself, but we use the law to enforce the rule of law and to make sure that the government's held to account. And we sue the government directly sometimes over misconduct, but the law we use most often here in Washington, D.C., I take Washington wherever I am, so forgive me for saying here, is the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal transparency law passed in 1967 that gives you access to government records. And the wonderful thing is that they don't give you the records you ask for, or they don't give you enough of those records, or they take away information or black it out in a way that they shouldn't have. You could sue the federal agencies in court. And once the federal agencies are in court, what a wonderful equalizing process that is, because no matter the agency, they have to explain to the court and to Judicial Watch when they're going to get the documents that they were due under the law. Now, it's never as fast as we'd like. We never get necessarily everything we want. But it's a precious, precious ability, the ability to do that. It's not available, frankly, anywhere else in the world to the extent it's available here. I'm sure the state of Maine has a similar transparency law. All the states do as well. And I can tell you, if it's the right, you need to exercise more directly, because you wouldn't be able to do it anywhere else. And I don't just mean third world, I mean places like France and England and Canada, things like that. So we've done a pretty good job of figuring out what the government's up to because no one else in Washington is terribly interested. They're usually part of the problem. Congress is terrible in government oversight. The federal agencies don't want to tell you what they're up to. And of course the president doesn't think he's subject to any law, let alone the United States Constitution. So this has been an essential way to provide the oversight of an out-of-control Washington, D.C. government. That didn't get out of control just under President Obama. Things have metastasized, but it's been increasingly out of control over the last 20 and 30 years. Believe me, we were founded during the Clinton administration. We know what corruption's like. Now, Judicial Watch is investigating virtually everything under the sun, and we saw that the government's doing more than ever, increased by probably more than about a third. Some of you maybe more budget mavens than I am. But congressional oversight's decreased by even greater amounts. So you're spending $4 trillion a year. Do you think there's any government agency that is given sufficient oversight with those types of budgets that they have access to? I mean, many of you are businessmen. Sometimes, what is the curse of a business? Having more cash than it knows what to do with. Well, think of a government agency. They don't see that as a curse because they don't feel any accountability. And Congress is not interested in doing the hard work of government oversight. So it falls to Judicial Watch in large measure. And we have filed over 3,000 Freedom of Information Act requests with the government of President Obama. And we filed well over 300 Freedom of Information Act lawsuits to get access to records that were due under the law. So as a result, we've got a critical mass of information gathering going that has resulted in documents about the IRS scandal, about Benghazi, about immigration, about election integrity, you name it, we're investigating it. So if I don't get it topic-wise, feel free to ask questions about it after. But we've been most notorious, or famous, for our work on the Clinton email scandal. And I'll tell you how we got into that and where that stands, because I think that's probably of greatest interest to you, but I'm happy to talk about other issues during question and answers. So we came onto the national scene in terms of making a significant impact historically, most recently in the Benghazi scandal. You had 4 or 5 or 6 congressional investigations into Benghazi. As you may recall, there was an attack on September 11, 2012, which by the date alone suggests there was a connection to terrorism, but the President and Mrs. Clinton thought there was a connection to a video by a right-wing lunatic out somewhere in California. That should tell you alone, immediately that there was something up with the story. And of course, those men were abandoned. Security was a disaster, and they continued to lie about the reasons for that attack. So there were a lot of controversy about that. And you may remember the president's campaign theme at the time was, Bin Laden is dead, GM is alive. Not a bad campaign slogan. One that is ruined with Al-Qaeda killing the United States ambassador on September 11th. The first ambassador murdered in the line of duty since Afghanistan in the late, under Jimmy Carter. So you can see the incentives that continue to lie about the reasons for that attack. So we got on the ball, did several Freedom of Information Act requests, and of course Congress is pretending to investigate it. And everyone wanted to know about the talking points that Susan Rice used to lie to the American people in the days after the attack. She went on all the Sunday morning talk shows and blamed it on an internet video. And the line of the administration, well, this was based on the intelligence community's assessment of what went on. So we wanted to know what was the briefing papers, what were the talking points that Susan Rice used. And we were getting documents. And so we got a bunch of documents. And then finally in March, I think, of 2014, we received some documents from the State Department. And I was looking at the press release, and we get documents and we try to put it into a press release. What's important about these documents? And there might be 3 or 4 major documents. And I noticed like number 3 in the press release, the headline was the White House talking points on Benghazi. And I remember writing a note back. I said, well, I think this might be the headline. Well, little did I know that our discovery of the White House being behind the talking points, the big lie on Benghazi, would be as dramatic as it would be, because Congress, despite the 4 or 5 or 6 congressional investigations, hadn't gotten that document. The media hadn't gotten that document. The little old Judicial Watch got that document. And to that time, there had been pressure from Judicial Watch and others on John Boehner to appoint at least a select committee on Benghazi, kind of a super committee to investigate this issue. And he didn't want to do that. But that was the final straw. And even John Boehner acknowledged that it was outrageous what had happened. And so as a result, he appointed a select committee on Benghazi. So Judicial Watch changed history, and that led to Trey Gowdy getting the investigation going. So that lawsuit continued, and it ended. But we had another lawsuit because we noticed in that other lawsuit that there were no documents from Hillary Clinton, no emails. Now, I'm thinking, well, maybe she doesn't send emails. It wouldn't surprise me if she didn't use email, given how much time she spent in the private sector. No time. The email wave had passed her by. But just to be safe, we filed a more specific request related to Mrs. Clinton and was also pursuing that. And they finally gave us documents later in 2014. And I think it's 2000. I might be off by a year. So yeah, it was later in 2014, and our lawyer said, well, where do you get these documents? Because these are the same that we got already. We already have these. And they said, okay, well, they have to, in the course of litigation, they have to tell you where they're looking, oftentimes. So they came back to us and said, well, there are other documents, we'll get back to you on that. And then in February of 2015, they finally told the court, we gave Judicial Watch everything except these other documents that we're still taking a look at. Well, you want to know what those documents were? The Clinton emails. So it was our litigation that forced them to admit, at least indirectly, that they were there. And I have no doubt that Benghazi litigation and our other litigation over her Clinton cash operation there in the State Department, where she made $48 million personally for speaking fees to Bill. Forget about what the foundation did. We were pushing for records on that. And all that was coming to a head, and they knew they had to own up to it. And so a few weeks after that court filing, a leak to the New York Times resulted in the disclosure of Mrs. Clinton's use of a private email account to conduct all of her government business. So I have no doubt it was our pressure that led to the disclosure. The select committee likes to take credit, so they'll let them take credit, but there'd be no select committee but for Judicial Watch either. So either way you cut it, it was Judicial Watch's work and litigation that ultimately led to the disclosure of the Clinton email issue, and may still lead to her conviction of a crime, but we know that's getting less and less likely. So after that email issue popped up, we said, oh my gosh, what's going on here? We had shut 2 cases down, several cases down, because they gave us documents. They said they looked everywhere they reasonably could. We said, okay, let's move on, and we shut the case down. Well, it turns out they lied because they didn't search for Clinton emails. We had 2 of our cases reopened by federal court judges. That doesn't happen. I don't think it's ever happened before. We have Freedom of Information Act cases reopened because the head of the agency was doing all of her business on a secret account that she didn't tell anyone about. And one of those cases was before Judge Emmett Sullivan. In that case, we were asking for documents about Yuma Abedin, Mrs. Clinton's one of her top aides, who was her deputy chief of staff, and then she decided that she wanted to live in New York and get paid by the government while working for the Clinton Foundation and another Clinton crony operation company. Good work if you can get it, right? Make $130K doing the work that you're supposed to do in Washington while living in New York while working for the Clinton Foundation. We wanted to know how that happened. So that case was reopened, and that was before Judge Emmett Sullivan. And boy, Judge Sullivan was very interested to know how this scandal happened. So he required Mrs. Clinton, the State Department, to get certification from Mrs. Clinton and her top aides that they turned everything over. And then under that litigation, she wrote something under penalty of perjury that was submitted to the court. She said, I don't know what this case is about, But to the best of my knowledge, I directed, all these documents were turned over by someone else, acting on my behalf. You know, talk about a loophole, latent declaration, but one that was still, I think, dishonest and misleading, because we know that she deleted many, many thousands of records. So we kept on getting records, and Abedin started presenting records as a result of that litigation. Cheryl Mills did. Cheryl Mills, who was our chief of staff. So pretty much everything that we knew about what was going on in the Clinton administration with the Clinton email scandal came about because of the litigation that we were bringing to bear. In addition, Freedom of Information Act litigation is typically pretty boring. In a sense, you're fighting over documents. You don't bring people in to testify under oath. But if there's some skullduggery going on, if there's something wrong going on, if the agency is doing something dishonest and the court says, didn't do a search in good faith, you may have the opportunity for discovery, which is a legal term for taking evidence, usually under oath. So people would have to come in and testify under oath. So we sought discovery, which Judge Sullivan and another judge, and both those judges granted discovery. And it was interesting, after the first hearing, where the Judge Sullivan said, well, Judicial Watch can get discovery because there's evidence of bad faith. He wanted to know how the system was operated, why there was special accommodation made of Mrs. Clinton. Within a week, the FBI said, oh, we want to talk to those people too. And then a few weeks later, a second judge reiterated what Judge Sullivan did, Judge Lamberth, and he granted us discovery too. He said, well, I see Judge Sullivan granted you discovery. You get what you get from him, and then come back to me with whatever else you need. You know, those are the sorts of things lawyers might like to see in terms of discovery. And then the FBI a week later said, we really want to talk to those people. Boy, I thought there was a connection there. And sure enough, Judge Sullivan then issued an order granting us discovery. We had a list of people. Then the FBI started talking to those people. So, however the FBI investigation turned out, I don't think it would have actually proceeded with any great seriousness, but for the pressure they were facing from Judicial Watch's discovery, because they knew that they would have to talk to these people before Judicial Watch did. So to that end, we talked to Cheryl Mills and Abedin, brought them in under oath, Brian Pagliano, the Clinton IT official who worked at the State Department but was also working on our email system, who took the Fifth Amendment. But that tells you something, and he thought there was a crime involved potentially. He was subject to criminal prosecution, and he didn't want to talk to us and took the Fifth Amendment. And the Judge Sullivan said, well, you can take this discovery, if you need Mrs. Clinton, come back and ask. So we did go back and ask last week, or 2 weeks ago, and there was a hearing earlier this week where Judge Sullivan had a 3-hour hearing, and our lawyer argued, and believe it or not, Hillary Clinton's lawyers had to come in and argue as to why she shouldn't testify. So I don't know if we're going to get her discovery, get her to come in and testify under oath, but we got our lawyers to come in and tell us why the American people shouldn't hear her on this email scandal. And that's a certain level of accountability. It's an imperfect accountability, but it's accountability nevertheless, because Mrs. Clinton still has to answer to the rule of law. Whatever the FBI does, whatever Congress does, there's still this litigation out there that is going to get the FBI records, for instance. We now know, as a result of this litigation, the new emails that Mrs. Clinton tried to hide from the American people or deleted or otherwise didn't give back, the FBI may have recovered. And thanks to this litigation, the FBI is having to turn it over to the State Department, is going to have to turn over what's relevant to us. It's not the Justice Department that was voluntarily releasing this. This is because of litigation and court orders. Congress is enforcing the release of this. This is just one watchdog organization. So you can see how we're changing history here. Changed it with Benghazi and the Clinton email scandal. And we're just one organization. I think we're pretty darn effective. But it's work well worth doing. You know, on Benghazi, for instance, you know, there's that Impact Washington. But, you know, I'm sure many of you are either serving or have family members in the armed services, or even family members who are deployed overseas in civilian capacities. we need to recognize the damage Benghazi did to the morale of those who are serving us abroad. Because it used to be that when things hit the fan, we'd be there to rescue them. That was the commitment. Well, Benghazi showed that commitment wasn't worth anything. Because when things hit the fan, we weren't there for them. And they've seen there's been no to little accountability officially. So it's the least we can do to vindicate them, and at least to those who were killed and injured, but also to reassure those who are still in the field fighting for us and risking their lives that we take this issue seriously and we're going to get the accountability. And that's not something I recognized till we became prominently known with Benghazi, because family members and those serving came up to me and talked to Judicial Watch generally about it. But that's something we need to keep in mind as we seek these and pursue these fights over government accountability. There are people who are putting their lives on the line for us as we speak, who don't have the support of this corrupt government. And to the degree Republicans are concerned in terms of a party, it's really only on the surface. There are members of both parties who obviously understand and agree with me on this. But in terms of the overall leadership, both they don't really think much about it. So that's why it's up for citizens groups like Judicial Watch and your personal activism to remind them that we take seriously our obligations to those defending us overseas. And because this government, our freedoms are a close-run thing. I think it was Ronald Reagan, I'm probably distorting the quote that many of you probably know. We're always a generation away from losing our liberty. It's not genetic, it has to be taught. We have to be vigilant. And unless we do that, that due diligence and that accountability to use the ability, the powers or the rights granted to us by our Creator, we could lose it. We see that with the IRS scandal. I can go in a little bit later during question and answer period, but the IRS scandal, where's the accountability there? There's a debate in Republican-controlled Congress about whether to impeach the IRS commissioner. And it's a debate those of us who want accountability are losing, because Republican leaders don't want to even impeach the IRS commissioner. Imagine that. If I went out in the street and asked any American, should I impeach the IRS commissioner, they may not know what impeachment means, but it doesn't sound good. They would probably say yes. They don't even know the details. Yes, you should impeach the IRS commissioner. Yet your brave Republican leaders can't even bring themselves to pursue that in the public way. And it's only because of pressure of some conservatives in Congress and conservatives on the outside are they doing anything on it. So that's the sort of crisis we have. I mean, we've got a real, sum it up in a more succinct way. You're going to, typically you vote, there are elections, you can, more or less your votes are counted, and elections more or less are accurate. There are advertisements, new people win or lose or are retained. But then Congress goes to town and they vote on and consider, let's say, a $1.5 trillion spending bill in 3 days. And then they give all that money to government agencies who don't want to give Judicial Watch any information, and Congress isn't really policing at all. And we have a president who thinks he can do whatever he wants, as long as the courts let him get away with it. Now, I know about you, that shows that we've kind of got some of the surface of democratic governance or self-governance, but that doesn't sound like self-governance to me. We get the vote, and then no one knows what's happening in Washington, and no one's controlling and minding the store. Well, we're doing our best to mind the store, and that's why so many of you, we have over 400,000 supporters, are out there. The burden on us is tremendous because there's no one else doing the work. But on the other hand, think of the opportunity we have, because we're showing there's an easy way forward. Look at what we're able to do. One group. Imagine if there was one or two more politicians in Congress in positions of influence and power who shared our values and our approach to government accountability. What they'd be able to do with the budgets and powers they have as members of Congress and the legislative branch. or we have a president or political appointees who shared those values, would they be able to accomplish? So that's what's frustrating, that it's so close in terms of great things happening, but it ought to be very inspiring and I hope motivating to know that it can be done and we can win and beat back this out-of-control government and take back control of our destiny. So with that, I appreciate your patience here as you allow me to expound on the crisis here in Washington or there in Washington. And you know, the left is completely out of control. I'm sure it's out of control up here in Maine and anywhere else it has where it's like a contagion. It's all over the world, all over the country. But we have to recognize that Washington is the most readily apparent version of what the left is up to. But I recognize that it goes on at the state level as well. And it used to be, you get kind of like state versions of the craziness in federal government. So I appreciate all your work in that regard that Matt is doing and his colleagues at the center. And so, you know, we stand with you. If you have any great ideas, contact us. And we're always, I always joke, I believe everything. In the sense, if there's something that might be going on that's wrong, I think we should check it out. And so don't think your ideas are not an interest to us, because we really want to pursue leads that are legitimate, and you never know what you're going to find. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for questions. So if you could just raise your hand and I'll call on you, and just speak loud enough for me to hear, and if I don't think anyone else has heard, I'll repeat the question. So yes, in the back, I saw your hand first, sir. Thank you very much.
Could you give us your assessment of the performance of Trey Gowdy and his committee?
Oh. The question was about my assessment of the performance of Trey Gowdy and his Select Committee on Benghazi. You know, when Trey Gowdy was installed as the committee chairman, I sought to meet with him, and he refused to meet with me. I told him I'd fly down from North Carolina. Is that his? South Carolina. And I remember it was August, and they were in town in August. I said, well, I'll fly down to South Carolina and meet you there if it's student committee. He didn't want to meet with me. I also offered to meet with the Democrats. They didn't want to meet with me either. And so the committee never really communicated with us. And if they did, it was grudging and, you know, in passing. So in my view, select committees such as that should have had many, many educational public hearings, as opposed to the only 4 they ran, and they ran incompetently. Their report is probably well worth reading. It provides more detail on information that Judicial Watch has already obtained on virtually everything of importance about Benghazi, about whether the security situation was there, about the lies, about the lack of military follow-up that was available but wasn't used, about the arms shipments going out of Syria, out of Benghazi to Syria, about the rise of ISIS being connected to Libya. All those things that Judicial Watch had independently found through a separate litigation and investigation that the committee, by the way, would actually attack us for disclosing. I recall that we had put out an email. We found that this Defense Department, just after the initial attack, said, you know, we've got people ready to go, spinning up. And it turned out the Benghazi committee had had that document for a year and hadn't released it. And if that opportunity had been taken, that military could have been there at least for the second part of the attack and maybe saved the lives of the 2 men killed at the CIA annex several hours after the initial attack. So the committee spent a lot of time attacking Judicial Watch for disclosing information. And at one point would call up media organizations to attack us directly. So I'm glad Trey Gowdy finally got his act together and got a report out, but it was a poor example of oversight. Yes, right back there.
Changing topics a little bit. In 2011, 2014, we discovered and got confirmed by NOAA that they lowered Maine's temperature history 350 degrees over a 110-year period. They said they did it because they felt there wasn't enough climate stations here in Maine, so they introduced Canadian temperatures. We've got the email from them citing that. The problem we had at that point is we indicated to them the computer algorithm we came up with, and I don't mean Al Gore has rhythm, it's that we tested that algorithm against Ohio, Tennessee, and the 48 contiguous states, and the same results occurred. So we had posed a question to them that they never returned an answer to us on, is if you felt you needed to add Canadian stations to Maine temperatures to revise and lower temperatures 350 degrees from 1815 to the present, excuse me, 1895 to present, why did you do it to the other states too? And we're still waiting for a report.
Well, the question was about the manipulation of climate change or climate data here in Maine by the federal government. And the federal government on climate change is not a neutral observer. They're advocates. You know, we've done some investigations on some data manipulation, and I recall doing a poll with Judicial Watch after one of the climate fraud questions were raised. And I was pleasantly surprised that I think like 50% of Americans thought it was a fraud. I mean, the whole climate change was a fraud. But it's a significant issue. The left wants to jail you if you disagree with them on that. They don't think they compare you to a Holocaust denier if you think that climate change is not explained the way they think it is explained. I mean, climate change can mean anything, but you know what it means from the left perspective. So it's just another example of politics intruding in areas where it shouldn't be, which is, the left wants to control what we do, and one way to do that is by regulating our energy, and the excuse for regulating our energy and destroying America by indirectly or bringing America down is by making us have less energy, and if you have less energy, you have less of an economy, and you have less power, and they hate America in that regard. And if you get in the way of that, they will subpoena you, as we've seen recently, or try to jail you, or suggest that you shouldn't even work. So it's a major crisis, and it just shows you how crazy things are in Washington, where a boring story, relatively speaking, I think to most Americans, the debate about climate change has the left so incensed that they're willing to bring law enforcement action against those that disagree with them. And that's how crazed things are.
I guess my question was, though, and I didn't finish it, was the question is, you were suing them to find out how they came up with their calculations. What is the status of that?
Oh, I know that lawsuit. You're right. Thank you for reminding me we have a lawsuit of hundreds on that regard. I don't know what the status of that is off the top of my head. I'll check it. Send me an email. I'll try to follow up, and maybe I'll share it with Matt if there's other interest. Yes, in the back.
Back to Benghazi, where planes were spinning up to go and rescue people. Are we ever going to be able to find out if an order was given to block the rescue attempts? Because, I mean, of course, God forbid the attack had gone on for 3 days. Were we ever going to send anyone? Is there anything underway to try to find out who blocked an order? Did the president, say don't go? We know that Leon Panetta gave an order to do everything possible. Is there any way to find out why we didn't send anyone to rescue?
Well, I think we generally know that the question is about the issue of whether there was a specific stand-down order on Benghazi and getting accountability on that and more information on that. With respect, in Benghazi, we know, or in Libya, there were people who wanted to go out of Tripoli who were told not to. Now, they argue whether there was a word stand down was used, but that's an argument over, that's a semantic argument. And then at the federal level, or, I shouldn't say the federal level, but in Washington, the military was made available, and the order was never given in time for them to go. And in fact, orders were given to them that prevented them from moving timely. Mainly, there was a delay because the concern out of the United States government was that Marines showing up in Marine uniforms might not be seen as politically useful to them in Libya at that time. So there were delaying orders given. So, you know, pick your poison. Stand down orders in effect were given out of Tripoli, and no action was taken timely as a result of whatever reason, either a lack of, because of the concern about the politics out of Washington, and as a result, people died unnecessarily. And you know, you talk to people involved in who were on the wrong end of the fire there, they still can't believe there's not been accountability. Yes?
Bob Cashmore from Bridgeton. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says the United States shall guarantee to every state a republican form of government and protect each of them against invasion. Now, I've been to the border 8 times, and the illegals, the drugs, and criminals coming across, and the Obama administration policies, to me, that's an invasion. So have any of the states or anybody else thought about using Article 4, Section 4 to sue the federal government over this invasion?
Now, you know, as the lunatic I am, I actually know what you're referencing, and I go around talking about it in the office, but everyone looks at me, well, no one's ever going to do that. But I think it's a legitimate point you raise. And not only do you not need to sue the government, in my view, you could probably create a compact. I think the Texas governor and the Kansas governor should deploy troops to the border. I mean, one thing that we've been very much involved in reporting and investigation is the border security. I mean, we have the illegal immigration crisis, which is a whole other bowl of wax, but the fact is we don't have a secure border, and as a result, the cartels are controlling the border as opposed to the United States government, and the cartels will work with everybody, including the terrorists. So you have to be naive to think that terrorists won't take advantage of an open border in Mexico. I mean, they know the FBI is on, you know, watching everyone prepare for terrorists to commit terrorist acts here in the United States, and then they let it happen despite them knowing that they're likely terrorists, but that's another matter. So one way to get around that is to bring new people in through the border. And, you know, I appreciate Mr. Trump's idea about putting the wall there, and I don't necessarily not support it, but I don't think we can wait for a wall. I don't think we can wait for a wall. And I think, given the crisis on the border, and what I've seen in our reporting and what's going on there and the corruption there, you know, I'm about as frantic about this as I am about any public policy issue. I fear a calamity as a result of our lack of security. And given the national security component, we ought to be talking about whether or not to deploy troops on the border. And there's an argument that the states could do it on their own to protect themselves. And that would be an interesting argument to have, wouldn't it? But we should be thinking about deploying troops on the border. The civilian enforcement of our border security is I guess, an honorable experiment that is a failure. And what is the evidence of that failure? 15 to 20 million illegal aliens. And many of them are coming through our airports, admittedly, but most of them still come through the border. There was someone back here, I saw a hand up. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Did Congress create the IRS?
Okay, that's a loaded question. Did Congress create the IRS? That's not just an idle question. Give me your...
The answer is no.
Okay.
Congress never created the IRS. It was done through the flick of a pen in 1952. Go investigate that.
Well, this is an issue that comes up often about the lawfulness of the income tax and the ability of the IRS to collect those taxes. Without getting into the debate about the historic aspect of it, I would encourage you all to pay the taxes that you think you owe. And don't try to use the defense in court that the IRS is an illegal entity or there's income tax is not constitutionally valid because it doesn't fly. And that doesn't go to the merits of the underlying argument, but I can tell you how it's going to be received. Yes, sir.
Yes, I can understand why the Democrats and the liberals drag their heels and avoid dealing with you. But what I don't quite understand, perhaps you could elaborate on, is if I understood you correctly, the Republicans and the so-called conservatives they seem to be feckless as well. They don't seem to be helping very much. Unless I misunderstood what you were saying. It seems like you alone, your organization alone, is what is causing a lot of this, and there's a lot of Republicans who seem to be avoiding dealing with the issues you're raising. Could you talk more about that and explain why they would do this? I would think the Republicans would jump on these issues.
You would think. My guess is the question is, why aren't Republicans more interested in the work and follow our lead? And actually, most of you could probably guess why. Because they're Republicans. And we know how Republicans generally, no, you're all Republicans more or less, but let's blame it on the leadership, shall we? And they have a very different approach to government oversight and accountability. And the Democrats are right, it's political. But they're wrong about the politics. And the politics is that they don't think corruption in politics works for them. And they're just willing to do enough to keep the lunatics like Tom Fitton happy, or so they think, but they never want to do the extra work necessary for full accountability. For instance, on the Clinton email scandal, there have been the most substantial hearings on the Clinton email issue. There was a story, front page of the New York Times, about her fundraising at the Clinton Foundation, where these Russians were using Canadian front operations to fund the Clinton Foundation, and then Hillary was involved specifically in decision-making related to the same front company's ability to take over the uranium market here in the United States. Front page story of the New York Times. You think that would be enough for a hearing? No. They don't like scandal politics because, when I think they don't like to be, because they know what they do too, they could be subject to scrutiny. And frankly, when they don't see it as something that's helpful to obtaining or retaining power. And also, the way Congress is set up, it's set up not to restrain government or hold government to account. It's set up to spend money. And the committee system is set up to allow the members on the committees to raise money. Because our political fundraising system is so backwards, these members spend an inordinate amount of time raising money because they're not allowed to raise, quote, big money directly, so they have to spend a lot of time raising contributions in small gobs. The best way to do that is to be a committee chairman or to be on a chair or on a committee and basically extort money out of the industry. Or, depending on your point of view, bribery. I love the bribery extortion. I like the chicken and the egg analysis of bribery extortion. And whether anyone's actually doing something illegal is another matter, but that's what Congress is designed to do. Spend your money, and when they're not doing that, they're raising money to obtain and retain power. And members who aren't interested in doing that don't get put on the major committees. And they're the ones that are being punished and being attacked by the Republican leadership. So there's got to be a radical reform of Congress, and you need a radically different approach. Oh, a lot of questions. Yes, right back here.
I was wondering if I'm right or wrong. It seemed to me like the president committed treason when he released 5 of the worst terrorists in our captivity without conversing with anyone. Number one, he was negotiating with a terrorist, and number one, he was aiding terrorists. Am I right or wrong, or is that treason?
Well, it's the questioner is asking about the exchange for Bowie Bergdahl, I think, where 5 top senior Al-Qaeda commanders were released in exchange for Bowie Bergdahl, who everyone knew at the time had abandoned his post and went AWOL. There's an argument whether, he was helping the enemy or truly imprisoned by it. Now he's under court-martial for it. But they released senior Al-Qaeda people. And terrible, terrible precedent, and you raised the point about treasonous activities. What's the way to police that type of misconduct? It's the impeachment power. And Congress simply refuses to exercise the impeachment power. You know, there are certain powers Congress has to force to hold the government to account. You know, one of the founding fathers said, in our Republican form of government, the legislative power necessarily predominates. Do you think that's the case now? Of course not. That's too much work. They can impeach, they can cut off funding, or they can designate money. And, or stop bad things from happening by refusing to fund it, which that's the best thing that this Republican Congress is doing, is basically not doing anything. But once things are going, or once things happen, they're completely incapable of fixing it. I shouldn't say completely, but that's where they have the most difficulty. So cutting off money that would lead to a government shutdown is not something they want to do. Impeachment, not something they want to do. So the alternative is what we have now. I don't know, how much more time do we have for questions, Heather?
We have time for about 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Why don't I take, let's say, 4, and I'll answer them all at once. Just ask the question quickly, and then I'll answer them all at once. So 1.
I have a quick question about, and it may be a legal issue that I don't know about, but I have read that the FBI agents that were on the Clinton email case were forced to sign an NDA that they would not talk about this afterwards. And I understand you don't talk about a case while it's going on.
Okay.
But afterwards, they're still not allowed to talk about it?
Okay, that's a question. And one there.
WikiLeaks is supposed to be releasing a trove of information this week. Do you have any idea of what might be contained within that?
Okay.
Continuing off what the fellow asked about, well, it's come out more and more that their secret side deals with Iran, that they're probably going to get nukes before the threshold. Ben Rhodes said, oh yeah, we just tricked everyone into what the deal was supposed to be, and it was anything but.
Okay. Yeah.
And, you know, people said, oh, Bush lied to the guy, it's itself a faulty statement. So by that logic, it seems Obama should be in solitary.
Right, I hear you. And who else had a question here? Yes, in the back there.
Yes, sir. Is the First Amendment so powerful that people like George Soros, who hires professional agitators, they're encouraging we got police officers being murdered, sniper attacks.
Right.
I don't even know who's accountable for all that, even though he's paying for those groups through his funding mechanisms.
Right. Well, to answer that that last question first, can you imagine the scope of a Justice Department investigation if there was a similar activity associated with conservative figures? You think they'd only be looking at the one shooter? Of course not. I don't know, I'm saying that there should be a broader investigation, but you raise a fair point. But it kind of is evidence of the crisis. So, you know, my view, President Obama is a transnational revolutionary. And the implicit endorsement of rioting by the president has been troubling. It's led in part to an increase of attacks on police. It's led to less policing. So not only are innocent Americans unsafe or less safe because of the lack of policing that occurs because of the defensive policing that's resulted from the attacks on the police, now the police are being under on direct attack. And this administration is genetically incapable or congenitally incapable of dealing with it because it's a creature of the left, and the left too often uses violence to get its way. And they have tactical disputes of whether violence is appropriate or not, but it's not convincing when they oppose it. When this president has tried to say things, he says he's opposing it, but it's hard to make that argument when he's trying to reassure the protesters that provide that help incite the culture that leads to people targeting and assassinating police officers. The secret deals with Iran, just, you know, another example of the administration knowingly lying about a matter of urgent national security, which is nuclear weapons in Iran. And it's just come out recently that there were even further lies and secret aspects to policy. You know, we got to rely, you know, we understand that certain diplomacy relies on certain private communications and, you know, winks and nods. But does anyone think the winks and nods of this administration are in favor of those who want a stronger national security? Of course not. And so any president, Democrat or Republican, is going to have to deal with putting Iran back in the box. And you know, when we're in a this is what I fear about our position of weakness. Weakness invites our opponents to make miscalculations. And when our opponents make miscalculations, that sometimes leads to war. And we end up being in wars that otherwise could have been avoided if our strength allowed our opponents to be, gave them the reason not to make more miscalculations. They thought they could, Iran may think they can get away with more than they should be able to, and then they overreach, and then we're forced to respond. I mean, that's what I fear, that we'll be in a several war situation as our opponents make you know, think that America is weak and they can get away with something, and we not in a position to let them get away with it. We end up getting in wars that otherwise could have been avoided. So that's a potential crisis we're facing. I don't know what WikiLeaks is going to release in terms of Clinton emails. The FBI is assuming it's been hacked. Her email's been hacked. And there are several thousand emails reported in court the other day in our case that they were able to recover. So, you know, there may be several thousand more Clinton emails coming out. I don't know whether it be via WikiLeaks, but they are going to be coming out via Judicial Watch's litigation, that's for sure. And the question is about the non-disclosure agreement by the FBI. Typically, those FBI agents involved in the Clinton email scandal were supposedly were required to file or sign non-disclosure agreements. That's unusual because the assumption is you don't speak out of school anyway and you don't need to do one. And to me, that's an act of intimidation. So, you know,
It is true that they were asked to do it?
Well, the reports are that they were. I've heard it separately as well. I heard it a long time ago. I didn't realize it was big news, but I should have disclosed it about the non-disclosure agreements. But it's been around there for a while that they've been asked to sign one. But it just tells you that it tells the FBI agents that you know, you do anything outside the lines, we're going to come after you, and it helps protect Mrs. Clinton and the half-baked investigation that the FBI conducted into her emails. So, but the nice thing about having Judicial Watch is, you know, we always presumed that we're going to just have to do our work no matter what the FBI and Justice Department did. So we're still asking for her testimony. As I said, we're waiting on the court to rule that. And we're just going to keep on asking for these emails and still asking for more accountability there. Well into the next administration, no matter what it is. And no matter what the government does, good or bad, you should recognize you have independent obligations to hold the government to account. And certainly we do, and you can do that through Judicial Watch, and I ask you to support our work. But think about how you can do a little bit of your judicial watching here locally. Maybe tell Matt what to do. And we're happy to work with Matt and his team as well in terms of local issues up here. But we need more help, not only directly, but we need other groups out there doing the hard work and citizens out there doing the hard work of government oversight, because politicians won't do it. Believe me, they won't do it. It's hard to do even if they want to. And they need either your incentivized pressure, if you know what I mean, or you need to just do it yourselves. And there are ways under our laws of doing it, and as I said, a precious, precious right, and I encourage you to exercise it to the strongest extent possible. So thank you for your time. I know it's a beautiful summer day here, and I appreciate that you were able to, you spent the time here with us rather than enjoying the weather or doing all the work you're doing. But thank you for your time and attention and patience. And we're on the internet at judicialwatch.org and on Facebook. And of course, you can reach out to us through Matt and such if you have trouble finding us directly. So thank you very much to the Maine Heritage Policy Center and all of your generous supporters of their work.